Welcome back to the deep dive. I am so glad you could join us today because we are getting into a topic that is equal parts brilliant, terrifying, and just completely essential to modern history.
Oh, absolutely.
Today, we are looking at the evolution and the highly specialized science of the gas mask.
It really is a profound subject. I mean, when we think of a gas mask today, we typically picture a very specific, modern piece of military or industrial hardware.
Right.
But the journey to engineer that piece of equipment is incredibly long, complex, and filled with some truly unexpected scientific breakthroughs.
It is. And for today's deep dive, we have gathered a really comprehensive stack of material anchored by a super detailed Wikipedia article on the subject.
Yes.
It traces this technology all the way from ancient Greek sponges to the cutting-edge chemical filtration used in modern warfare.
And what makes this such a compelling discussion for you listening today is how perfectly it illustrates human ingenuity responding to extreme pressure. The history of this technology is driven by industrialization. Unfortunately, some of the darkest chapters of global conflict.
So our mission today is to trace how a very simple idea, just wanting to filter the air we breathe, evolved into a complex, life-saving technology.
Spot on.
We want to uncover the surprising chemistry of how we actually protect our lungs and look closely at the intense historical catalysts that force this technology forward. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it. We should begin by looking at the earliest attempts to manipulate the air we breathe.
We really have to go back to the earliest origins. In ancient Greece, the common sea sponge was actually used as a kind of proto-gas mask.
Just a physical sponge.
Yeah, just held over the face to try and block out smoke or dust.
It makes a certain kind of intuitive sense.
Yeah.
You take a porous material and use it as a physical barrier. But the leap from a simple sponge to an engineered breathing device took centuries.
Right.
The next major milestone doesn't happen until 1799.
That was Alexander von Humboldt. He was working as a mining engineer in Prussia and introduced one of the first primitive respirators specifically for miners.
Which is entirely logical when you think about the environment. Working underground in the 18th century, miners were constantly hitting pockets of unbreathable toxic gases and dealing with heavy particulate dust.
So industrial necessity became the first real driver for respiratory protection.
Exactly. And that industrial need kept pushing things forward.
By 1847, we see the forerunner to the modern gas mask invented by Louis P. Hazlitt.
Yes.
He was granted a patent for it in 1849 under the incredible name, the lung protector.
It is a very descriptive title. Hazlitt's design was essentially an inhaler that filtered dust out of the air. It was purely mechanical.
It had a bulb-shaped filter, right?
Right, utilizing a bulb-shaped filter and valves that allowed you to breathe air in through a mouthpiece and then vent your exhaled air back out into the room.
But one of the most visually striking early designs has to be the one patented in 1914 by Garrett Morgan.
Oh, the safety hood.
Yeah, the safety hood and smoke protector. The design is just wild to picture. It was a cotton hood that went entirely over your head, but it featured two long hoses that hung all the way down to the floor.
There is brilliant thermodynamic logic to that design.
How so?
Well, in a burning building, the heat and smoke rise. Therefore, the safest, most breathable, and coolest air is right down at floor level.
That makes total sense. And at the end of those hoses dragging on the floor, Morgan inserted moist sponges to help filter the air even further before it traveled up the tubes to the user.
Right. It is a very clever, entirely mechanical solution to a hazardous environment.
It is clever.
It is. But it brings us to a really crucial scientific distinction that we need to define early on. The fundamental difference between absorption and adsorption.
Okay.
Understanding this difference is the only way to understand how early devices functioned and why they ultimately had to evolve into complex chemical filters.
Wait, can we slow down on that for a second?
Sure.
Because absorption and adsorption sound like the exact same word to most people. How do they actually differ?
It is a vital distinction. Absorption with a B is the process of a substance being drawn into the volume of a larger body or substrate.
Like a sponge.
Exactly. Think of a dry kitchen sponge soaking up a spill on your counter. The water physically goes into the material of the sponge. Adsorption, with a D, is an entirely different mechanism.
Okay, so what is that?
It is the process of a substance depositing upon a surface.
So instead of soaking in, the hazard is just sticking to the outside layer of the filter material.
Precisely. Adsorption uses attractive electrical charges. A great way to visualize this is static electricity.
Like a balloon?
Yeah, if you rub a balloon on your head and stick it to a wall, the balloon is clinging to the surface because of attractive charges. Adsorption in gas masks works on a microscopic level just like that.
That is fascinating.
If the hazardous particles in the air have a specific charge, you engineer a filter substrate with the opposite charge, and the toxic particles essentially get magnetized and stick to the surface.
What kind of materials actually do that?
Things like activated carbon and materials called zeolites. Zeolites are just highly porous minerals.
What do they look like?
On a microscopic level, they look like a dense honeycomb. Because they are so porous, they have a massive amount of surface area, which provides millions of tiny attachment points for toxic molecules to get stuck to via those attractive charges.
Wow. And understanding that difference completely debunks a very common survival myth that a lot of people listening might have heard.
The damp cloth myth.
Yes. We've all seen movies where someone grabs a damp cloth, ties it over their mouth and nose, and runs through a burning building perfectly fine.
A wet cloth relies heavily on simply trapping physical particulates. It'll catch the large pieces of soot and the physical ash produced by the combustion.
And that is genuinely helpful in keeping your airway clear of debris.
It is. But here is the critical survival takeaway. It completely fails to stop toxic gases.
Because it doesn't have the chemical properties to absorb a gas like carbon monoxide.
Nothing at all. Carbon monoxide is a gas that displaces the oxygen you need to survive. A wet rag cannot perform the complex chemical filtration required to neutralize or trap that gas.
So while it might keep you from coughing up ash, it will not prevent you from suffocating.
Exactly.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the moment in history where humanity suddenly and quite desperately needed complex chemical filtration.
The outbreak of the First World War.
The historical catalyst that changed the trajectory of this technology forever. April 22nd, 1915, the Second Battle of Ypres in Belgium.
Yes.
The German army successfully used poison gas, specifically chlorine gas, for the first time against Allied troops. When you read about this moment in history, the sheer panic and lack of preparation is staggering.
The initial responses were entirely improvised on the battlefield. By May 1st, just over a week after the attack, troops were simply being issued cotton wool wrapped in muslin.
Just a piece of cotton.
They were just desperate to have anything over their faces.
Then came the black veil respirator, which was invented by John Scott Haldane. That was basically just a cotton pad soaked in an absorbent chemical solution tied over the mouth with black cotton veiling. But that wasn't providing enough protection either, was it?
It wasn't. So a man named Clooney McPherson stepped in with a design that gets much closer to what we recognize today.
What did he do?
McPherson designed a canvas hood that fitted over the entire head. The canvas was heavily treated with chlorine-absorbing chemicals, and he fitted it with a transparent mica eyepiece so the soldiers could actually see while wearing it.
And he presented that idea to the British War Office Anti-Gas Department on May 10th, 1915. Within weeks of the first attack, they are adopting his design.
It moved incredibly fast.
But here's what I don't quite understand. As the war dragged on, the gases got deadlier. They moved from chlorine to things like phosgene and chloropicrin.
They did.
How did the masks keep up? Did they just soak the canvas hoods in even more chemicals?
No, the canvas hoods quickly became obsolete against those new threats. And to answer your question, phosgene is a particularly insidious gas.
Why is this?
It's colorless and smells faintly of musty hay, but it causes severe suffocation, sometimes hours after exposure.
Terrifying.
And chloropicrin is a severe irritant that causes intense vomiting. The strategic goal of chloropicrin was to force soldiers to throw up, making them rip off their gas masks.
Oh, wow. Which then exposed them to the lethal phosgene gas that was often fired alongside it.
Exactly. To combat these complex attacks, they needed a totally new filtration method.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
They turned to a very specific, yet incredibly basic material, charcoal.
In 1915, a Russian chemist named Nikolai Zelinsky invented the first effective filtering activated charcoal gas mask.
Yes, he did.
But they realized pretty quickly that standard wood charcoal wasn't entirely sufficient, right?
Exactly. Wood charcoal was okay, but by 1918, militaries made a fascinating discovery. Charcoals made from the shells and seeds of fruits and nuts performed vastly better.
Like what kind of fruits and nuts?
We were talking about coconuts, chestnuts, horse chestnuts, and specifically peach stones.
Why would a peach stone work better than a piece of wood for filtering toxic gas?
It comes back to that concept of adsorption and surface area. When you carbonize a dense, hard shell like a coconut or a peach pit, it creates an incredibly dense network of microscopic pores.
I see.
It provides a massively higher surface area for those toxic molecules to get trapped in compared to wood, which is relatively soft and less structurally dense.
And that structural density led to these massive public recycling programs across the globe.
It really did.
Citizens were actively collecting fruit pits to support the war effort. You had
Right.
families saving their peach pits after dinner so they could be shipped off and burned into charcoal to build gas masks for the front lines.
It is a surreal historical reality.
Ugh.
And the sheer scale of the chemical warfare during this period led to another grim development. They weren't just manufacturing masks for human soldiers.
Right, they had to develop and manufacture special gas masks engineered specifically for the snouts of
The
dogs.
messenger dogs.
Yeah, which were frequently used as messengers on the front lines and for the horses operating in the mounted units and pulling artillery.
When you realize that thousands of custom masks had to be engineered for animals, it paints a devastating picture of what the air quality on those battlefields was actually like. Complete environmental saturation.
It's really hard to even picture. So how did the designs change as we moved out of World War I and into World War II?
The evolution was largely driven by a thematic shift in how wars were fought. World War I was defined by static trench warfare.
Right, everyone was mostly staying put.
Exactly. A soldier could tolerate wearing a bulky canvas hood with a heavy hose leading to a large box respirator because they largely stayed in one place. World War II, however, was highly mobile.
So they needed completely different gear.
Troops started to move fast, which necessitated lighter, less cumbersome gear.
That makes perfect sense. In 1943, the British developed the light anti-gas respirator. They started utilizing early plastics and rubber-like materials, which made the masks significantly lighter.
They also vastly improved the form factor. Instead of those heavy, dragging hoses, they moved to filter canisters that could easily and quickly screw directly onto the side or the front of the facepiece.
A huge improvement.
And those brittle glass and mica eyepieces were replaced with durable, replaceable plastic lenses.
But as the defensive technology improved, the offensive weapons became unimaginably worse. Moving into the Cold War era, the global threat evolves into NBC.
Nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons.
Yes, and this is where the traditional gas mask runs into a very hard physical limit.
This raises an important question. What exactly is a standard gas mask protecting?
Just the airway.
Right. For agents that cause harm through contact or penetration of the skin, like blister agents such as mustard gas, or advanced nerve agents like VX, a gas mask alone is simply not enough.
Wait, so even if the mask is working perfectly and it is successfully filtering all the toxic elements out of the air you breathe, the user is still in lethal danger. How does the gas bypass the lungs entirely?
Because your skin is an organ, and it is highly absorbent. Nerve agents attack the nervous system and can cause fatal systemic failure just by making contact with exposed skin.
That is terrifying.
Blister agents cause massive, debilitating tissue damage upon contact. To survive those specific threats, you have to wear a full, hermetically sealed protective suit in addition to the mask. A gas mask only protects your respiratory system.
That is a critical distinction, especially when you consider how many civilians purchase surplus gas masks online, mistakenly believing that a mask alone makes them invincible to any kind of modern chemical attack.
Relying on faulty, incomplete, or inappropriate protective equipment can lead to absolute tragedy. When you look at the Iran-Iraq War, which lasted from 1980 to 1988, you see a devastating example of what happens when this technology fails on a national scale.
Iraq was heavily developing its chemical weapons program during that time, and they deployed those weapons on a massive scale against Iranian forces.
And Iran was caught completely unprepared for a chemical war.
In 1984, Iran was scrambling to procure protection for its troops. They managed to buy masks from the Republic of Korea, but there were immediate massive logistical issues. First, the filters on these Korean masks only lasted for 15 minutes.
A 15-minute window of protection during a sustained, hours-long chemical bombardment is terrifyingly brief. It is almost completely ineffective.
Furthermore, the Korean masks were specifically designed for East Asian facial structures. When issued to Iranian troops, the masks didn't conform properly to their faces, which meant they couldn't achieve an airtight seal.
A mask without a feel is useless.
Exactly. But the situation got even worse when Iran purchased 5,000 masks from East Germany.
What's fascinating here is, and I say fascinating in the darkest, most tragic possible sense, those East German masks weren't actually gas masks at all.
They were spray painting goggles.
Exactly. Industrial spray painting goggles. Sold to a nation desperate for defense against weaponized chemical agents.
Unbelievable.
It is an appalling historical detail that resulted in massive casualties.
It forced Iran to completely shift gears. They realized they couldn't rely on foreign imports. By 1986, Iranian diplomats were actively traveling across Europe just to buy raw active charcoal and various filter models so their engineers could figure out how to reverse engineer them.
A massive undertaking.
And by 1988, they finally started domestic production of reliable masks at the Iran Yasa factories.
It's a brutal, costly lesson in the absolute necessity of specialized, reliable chemical filtration. Which brings us to how modern filters actually function today, because it is no longer just a canvas sack full of crushed peach stones.
Right. The chemistry behind modern filters is incredibly specific. Today, filtration relies on substances engineered to be more reactive than the air itself.
Yes.
They use advanced materials like synthetic resins that are created with specific groups of atoms attached to them, which are called functional groups.
Think of a functional group as a microscopic chemical lock, engineered to only snap together with a very specific chemical key.
With the key being the toxin.
Exactly. It is essentially custom chemical tailoring.
Yeah.
You can design a synthetic resin to actively bond with a specific toxic group. When the contaminated air pulls through the filter, the reactive substance bonds with the toxin, ripping it out of the airstream and locking it into the filter before it ever hits your lungs.
Because different chemical weapons or industrial toxins require different chemical reactions to neutralize them, modern filters use a universal color code so the user knows exactly what they're protected against.
It is a very rigid, life-saving classification system. For example, under the EU classification, if you see a brown strike on a filter canister, you know that filter contains these specific functional groups designed to protect against organic compounds.
And a green stripe.
A green stripe protects against ammonia and amines.
What are amines?
Amines are derivatives of ammonia, often used in industrial chemicals and pesticides, and they are highly irritating and dangerous to the respiratory tract. A red stripe protects specifically against mercury vapor.
There is black for carbon monoxide, yellow for acidic gases. It is a literal color code for survival.
It really is.
But of course, all of that brilliant chemistry doesn't matter even a little bit if the mask doesn't fit your face perfectly. The physical seal against the skin is everything.
Fit testing is a mandatory protocol. You cannot just strap a mask on, tighten the straps, and hope for the best. You have to verify the seal.
The way they actually test the seal on these modern masks is so incredibly simple yet effective. They use the banana test.
Yes, using isoamyl acetate.
They use a synthetic banana flavorant, or sometimes camphor. You put the mask on, you secure the straps, and they release this strong banana scent into the air around you.
And the logic is simple.
Right. If you can smell bananas while wearing the mask, you have a leak and you are not protected.
It is an innocuous challenge agent. It safely tells you if the seal is compromised without putting your health in danger. Though it is worth noting that the military takes a slightly more intense, realistic approach to fit testing.
They use actual tear gas, don't they?
They do. In military training, they will use agents like CN, CS gas, or stannate chloride in a sealed chamber.
That sounds intense.
The logic there is psychological as much as it is physical. If a soldier stands in a room completely filled with dense tear gas and feels absolutely fine, it gives them absolute, unwavering confidence in their gear. They know, without a doubt, that it works when their life depends on it.
Speaking of trusting your gear, there is a very important warning we need to pass along regarding vintage gas masks. If you are ever at a military surplus store or an antique shop and you find an old gas mask from the mid-20th century,
Do not put it on.
do not put it on your face and absolutely do not try to breathe through a vintage filter.
This is a critical safety warning. Old gas masks are inherently dangerous for a few reasons. First, rubber aggressively degrades over time. A vintage mask will likely have micro cracks and will leak, offering zero protection.
That makes sense.
But the actual hazard lies within the vintage filters themselves.
Many World War II and Soviet Cold War era masks, like the incredibly common Soviet GP5 masks, contain asbestos.
Specifically, they used cressetyl or cressetylite asbestos. At the time, they didn't fully understand how harmful it was, and asbestos is actually a highly effective particulate filter.
But inhaling it is deadly.
Inhaling decades-old, degrading asbestos dust directly into your lungs is a recipe for severe respiratory diseases, including mesothelioma.
And it isn't just the very old Soviet masks. The U.S. Army's C2 black canister contains hexavalent chromium, which is a known potent carcinogen.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
The U.S. Army Chemical Corps studied it and stated the exposure levels were technically acceptable, but they still explicitly urge caution when handling or using it. So again, leave the vintage masks on the shelf as historical curiosities. Do not wear them.
Absolutely. However, even if you have a brand new state-of-the-art mask, perfectly fit tested with zero leaks,
Right.
and a brand new color-coded filter, there is still a massive physiological drawback to wearing one.
Okay, so what does this all mean? If the mask is working perfectly and the air coming in is totally clean, aren't you completely safe?
You are safe from the external chemical threat, yes. But by wearing the mask, you are introducing a new internal threat to your body, your own exhaled breath.
Because of the dead space.
Exactly. When you wear a typical gas mask, there is a physical gap between the inside of the facepiece and your actual face. That gap is the dead space.
Okay.
Every time you exhale, your breath, which is heavily laden with carbon dioxide, fills that confined space.
Yeah.
And because you are sealed into the mask, you end up re-inhaling a significant portion of your own carbon dioxide with your very next breath.
The numbers regarding this are actually quite shocking. The standard occupational exposure limit for carbon dioxide over a normal 8-hour shift is about 0.5% by volume.
Yes.
But inside the dead space of a gas mask, the CO2 exposure can skyrocket to 2.6%.
That is a massive physiological burden. To put that 2.6% into real-world context is essentially like breathing into a paper bag for an hour straight while simultaneously trying to do intense manual labor or navigate a highly stressful, dangerous environment.
It takes extra physical effort just to pull air through the dense chemical filters, which tires out your respiratory muscles.
Yes, it is exhausting.
Add in breathing 2.6% carbon dioxide, and it leads to intense, debilitating headaches. Not to mention the severe skin issues. Long-term use causes painful dermatitis and severe acne from the sweat and oils trapped against the skin by the rubber seal.
The physical toll on the human body is so severe that the UK Health and Safety Executive Textbook explicitly recommends limiting the use of standard respirators without an independent air supply to just 1 single hour.
Just 1 hour. That is incredible. After 60 minutes, the very tool that is keeping you alive is actively making you sick.
It really puts the entire technology into perspective.
It absolutely does.
Right.
We have traced an incredible journey today, starting from ancient Greeks holding sea sponges over their mouths to Alexander von Humboldt protecting Prussian miners.
Right through the frantic, desperate innovations of World War I.
Where citizens were recycling peach stones for charcoal all the way to modern, highly specialized synthetic resins engineered with microscopic chemical locks.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is the ultimate balancing act. We are constantly engineering brilliant ways to protect the human lungs from the lethal hazards of the outside world, while simultaneously trying not to suffocate on the exhaust of our own internal biology.
Which leaves us with a fascinating thought to end on today. If the history of the gas mask is a direct mirror to the escalating history of chemical warfare, and our absolute best modern protection still leaves us choking on our own exhaled breath after just 60 minutes.
It's a sobering reality.
It really is. How will we engineer the personal protective equipment of the future? When the hazards become entirely microscopic, novel, or genetically tailored, how do we protect ourselves without becoming trapped in a toxic, unbreathable bubble of our own making?
That is the daunting challenge for the next generation of engineers and chemists.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you learned something new, and we will catch you next time.